Coming to you from an undisclosed location, deep in the heart of the Santa Monica Mountains, I'm your intrepid host, L.A. Marzulli, and this is Politics, Prophecy, and a Supernatural Report. I want to discuss a site that I visited a few years back. It's called the Great Serpent Mound, and it certainly is one of the most intriguing sites I have ever visited while being on the trail of the Nephilim. It is situated in Peebles, Ohio, and is about a 3-hour drive from the Newark Earthworks, where we've held the Nephilim Mounds conferences. The Newark Earthworks are absolutely incredible because they're these huge mounds of earth, which were piled up in this huge circle, this great circle. It's one of the largest mounds in the world. Interestingly, though, that modern-day archaeologists insist that Native Americans built these. We're saying we're not so sure. In fact, Chief Joseph has come on the record and stated that, wait a minute, Native Americans didn't do things like this. In fact, we have the Native Americans themselves stating that when they arrived in this area in Newark, Ohio, that the mounds were already in existence. Hi, I'm standing here in what is actually the Great Circle Mound in Newark, Ohio. It is November 14th, 2015, and as we've just panned around the circle, this is an incredible earthwork. It's over 1,225 feet in diameter. And what's interesting about the circle here, it has what is known as a henge. In other words, because it's a circle, there's a water course that's inside the mound, which goes the entire circumference of the mound. At one time, we believe that this was actually filled with water. The water was somehow channeled from Raccoon Creek about a quarter mile away, and this would fill this channel that we see all around the Great Circle Mound. Historians will try to tell us that Native Americans built this, and doing a little bit more research and actually talking to Native American tribes, specifically Chief Joseph Riverwind and Dr. Laura Lynn Riverwind, what we find is that no, Native Americans did not build this. In fact, what's in the historical record is that Native Americans arrived on this scene and found it. Another thing I want you to take note of is that all the trees that we see around the area were not here. In fact, if you really wanted to preserve this place, they would hire a group of tree guys to come in and get rid of all the trees. That would give the viewer a real sense of just how large an area this was. What's interesting also is that apparently in the early days when the white people first came into this area, they also talked about the heads here were actually the heads of a serpent. And there was one on each side, which you don't see now because they've been destroyed. This area was used during a civil war, so it's been, the site has certainly been, I don't want to use the word contaminated, but it's not exactly pristine in the way it was, let's say, thousands of years ago. The idea that both of these on either side of me could have been serpent heads is very telling, because just a few miles from here, near Chillicothe, of course, is the Great Serpent Mound, and that is in the effigy of a large undulating serpent. And that serpent is attempting, depending on who you talk to, some people will say that the serpent is giving birth to the egg, and the serpent is wisdom, and the egg is mankind, and all this other nonsense. In my opinion, this is what I truly believe. It goes back to the Genesis 3 passage where we read that the seed of the serpent will be at enmity with the seed of the woman. There's a war going on, a seed war between the fallen cherub Satan, that's the seed of a serpent, and the seed of the woman who will eventually become Messiah. What's interesting about this, the serpent mound, thousands of years old, what do we see? That serpent with his jaws wide open, and here's the egg, is in fact is the serpent trying to swallow the egg and destroy the egg so that Messiah will never be born. And that's the position that I take, and my hats are off to Mark Hirschman for coming up with that when he attended Nephilim Mounds 3 and heard Gary Stearman discuss the seed war. The Great Serpent Mound depicts an effigy of a serpent whose body coils and winds its way over the flat terrain, ending with its mouth wide open, and appears to be swallowing an egg directly in front of it. I have a small pamphlet given to me by a fellow watchman from 1924, and it states this about the Serpent Mound. The effigy was first described by Squire and Davis, pioneers in American archaeology, all the way back in 1848. When these men made their survey and gave to the world the first description of this wonderful earthwork, it was then covered with a dense forest, and therefore in an excellent state of preservation. Its size, form, and outline were well remembered by the older citizens residing in the vicinity, and its later restoration, where its form had been slightly disturbed in many places, was readily and accurately made. In other words, folks, early pioneers knew that this Serpent Mount was there. They had traveled to it. They had probably seen it. But again, the vegetation had grown up. And of course, this points back to a very, very early date, but I digress. There have been many people who have posited what the Serpent Mound means and why it was constructed, and of course, who went through the trouble to construct it in the first place. Among modern-day archaeologists, there is much debate to the age of the Great Serpent Mound. Some put it about 1,000 years old, while others insist it might be 3,000 years old or perhaps even older. Recently, the Shoshone Native American tribe set out to set the record straight as to who built the serpent effigy. The Shoshone are insisting that Native Americans built this, but really, what proof do they have? We are told that skeletons were exhumed from large mounds that existed around the site, but as usual, the skeletons have gone missing. So we really have no idea how tall these people were, the skeletons were, or if they were Native Americans or perhaps something else entirely different. One line of a 1924 pamphlet tells us that an adult male of 6 feet in height was removed from the burial mound, which is tall for a Native American, but certainly not something out of the ordinary. However, my work on Catalina Island, which is about 26 miles across from the city of Los Angeles, California, showed that large skeletons were exhumed from that island, just shy of 9 feet in height. And if you want to get more about that, folks, go back and look at Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, PPS Report number 19. This discovery was made in 2014 and published in my book, On the Trail of the Nephilim, Volume 2. It was further highlighted on the History Channel season finale of In Search of a Lost Giant show, where I was able to present all of my findings along with the analyses of the photograph I discovered hidden away in the archives, never to see the light of day. Chief Joseph Riverwind has stated, to the best of his knowledge, Native American cultures did not create the enormous Great Circle Mound that we see in Newark, Ohio, or in fact the Serpent Mound in Peebles. If that's true, it creates even more of a mystery. We know from the biblical prophetic narrative that around 3,500 years ago, Joshua and Caleb, along with the children of Israel, began the conquest of Canaan. We know that a mandate was given by God to destroy everyone in the land, men, women, children, and animals, and to burn everything. The Israelites were to take nothing, no spoil. This is genocide. And in fact, this is the exact chapter and verse that evolutionist Richard Dawkins uses to promulgate the idea that the God of the Old Testament is a genocidal, homicidal, bloodthirsty, capricious maniac. He's right, unless we factor in the Nephilim. We know from the biblical account that the Nephilim were in the land. The Nephilim were the progeny of fallen angels and the women of earth. We read about this in Genesis 6, and while this is a controversial passage, I believe it may be the key to understanding biblical prophecy. In other words, if we don't understand Genesis 3, which tells us emphatically, your seed will be at enmity with the seed of the woman. He shall crush your head and you will bruise his heel. If we don't understand Genesis 3, then how are we to come to grips with who the Antichrist is? Is he the seed of the serpent? The quote above is from the Most High God and is directed at the serpent, whose seed will be at enmity, war with the seed of the woman. We know that the seed of the woman eventually becomes Messiah. But what of the seed of the serpent? Has it yet to manifest, or has it already done so? The answer, of course, is found a few chapters later in Genesis 6, where we read about the sons of God marrying the daughters of men. This is the eruption of the serpent seed, and it manifests in the progeny known as the Nephilim. The biblical narrative further states the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God saw the daughters of men and took wives and went into them. This passage, while admittedly it's controversial, and it seems many passages are, seems very straightforward to me. Please remember that Moses is writing this hundreds of years later after the flood from Mount Sinai, and the Most High God is telling him what to write. Why wouldn't he just tell him to write the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and leave it at that? It seems that God goes out of his way to inform us that this incursion, the sons of God or the fallen angels, would not only be for the days of Noah, but for also after that. Later, after the flood, we see the Nephilim in the Promised Land. There are actually many Nephilim tribes there. The Nephilim, the Rephaim, the Emims, the Anakims, and so on. I would posit that these names have more meaning than just a casual reading would reveal. For instance, the Anakim, when translated, means the long necks. Could these names be denoting certain genetic characteristics? All of this is backstory to establish the point that the Nephilim were in the Promised Land when Joshua and Caleb, with the 12 tribes of Israel, began the conquest. I've covered this aspect in detail in my book, On the Trail of the Nephilim, Volume 1 and Volume 2. It is my contention that there was a diaspora from the Levant or Promised Land. In other words, a great exodus may have taken place, where some of these Nephilim tribes, seeing the annihilation from the hand of Israel being inflicted on other Nephilim tribes, fled northward into what is now Europe and made their way to the New World, i.e. America. If that is the case, then we should see vestiges of this, and in my opinion we do. There are Native American oral tradition of giants roaming the land, and were there before the Native Americans. We have numerous newspaper stories published in both the 19th and 20th centuries citing giant skeletons being unearthed from 7 feet tall to over 12 feet in height. We have the photographic evidence that I discovered and analyzed on Catalina Island, which show the existence of giants just under 9 feet. So with all this in mind, let's return to the Serpent Mound. I want to focus on one aspect of the Serpent Mound, and it's this. We see that the serpent seems to have its mouth wide open and is in the act of swallowing what appears to be an egg. What were these ancient mound builders saying by going to the trouble of constructing such an elaborate earthwork? Who supported the workers while they labored to construct this effigy? Is there a message hidden in plain sight? Before I go any further, I need to give you the backstory as to how I came upon what I believe is startling new information. On September 12, 2015, we held the 3rd annual Nephilim Mounds Conference in Newark, Ohio. Gary Stearman, Russ Disdar, Chief Joseph, and Dr. Laura Lynn Riverwind, as well as Fritz Zimmerman and yours truly, presented information about the mounds and the biblical Nephilim. There was an amateur archaeologist by the name of Mark H. The man was in the audience and he listened to Gary Stearman's presentation entitled, "It's All About the Seed." He had what can only be described as a cosmic download and was given revelation as to what the Serpent Mound may mean. I realize this might sound strange to some folks, so let me explain. As a spirit-filled believer in Jesus, we have the Spirit of a living God dwelling in us. He can and will speak to us and does so in a variety of ways. Sometimes the scripture will jump off the pages of our Bible, and even though we've read this passage before, it seems to have new meaning and we receive fresh insight from it. Sometimes he can speak through dreams. Other times it can be a casual conversation with a friend who will say something to us that when we hear it, we immediately realize that God has spoken through this person. There are instances when the Spirit of a living God will give us insight into something that is profound. I've had this several times and have written about it. One time was with Richard Shaw in Cusco. We were both hit with what I'll term a cosmic download. In other words, we were given information that neither of us would have thought about on our own. Well, this might sound strange to some folks. It is what should be the norm for a believer in Jesus, the Messiah, as we walk in the Spirit, and the natural man, the one not born from above, does not understand nor can participate in any of this. So back to how all of this happened with Mark. Mark was in the process of hosting an event on the Serpent Mound, and perhaps this was the reason he was thinking about the Serpent Mound when he attended the Nephilim Mounds 3 conference. Gary was at the lectern and proceeded to discuss the Genesis 3 passage, which states, "I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. He shall crush thy head, and you shall bruise his heel." I also addressed this briefly in my talk, pointing back to Gary's presentation, that there is a seed war, and it is between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. We know from this prophetic text that the seed of the woman gave birth to the Messiah almost 2,000 years ago. This was a game changer and resulted in the defeat of the fallen cherub, Satan, although the kingdom of Jesus has not yet manifested. I think we're in the birth pains though. So with that in mind, and looking at the Serpent Mound, Is the serpent in the act of swallowing an egg or birthing the egg? Which is it? What's going on here? The serpent is depicted in the hundreds of undulating yards of piled earth, which has become known as the Serpent Mound. The serpent is in the act of swallowing the egg, and it is doing so to prevent the fulfillment of the prophecy in Genesis 3, which states with great specificity that the seed of the serpent will be at enmity, at war with the seed of the woman. To put it succinctly, could it be that we are looking at the direct result of this ongoing cosmic war and the creation of a serpent mound? A direct, in-your-face statement that the serpent would prevail? The serpent is swallowing the egg in an attempt to thwart the birth of the one who will crush the serpent's head, i.e. the Messiah. Depending on which archaeologist one refers to, the Serpent Mound was constructed almost 3,500 years ago, to use the oldest date, well before the birth of Jesus. The youngest date is around 800 years ago, which of course is still pre-Columbian, but we know Native Americans are inhabiting this region at this time. I would put forth that those who constructed this mound had knowledge far beyond what Native American tribes had access to. I'm speaking of the alignment of the solstices and equinoxes and other solar alignments that are part of the Serpent Mound. It would be good to insert a passage from the book of Enoch, which is thousands of years old and was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The book of Enoch is also quoted numerous times in the Tanakh, or the Hebrew Bible. Furthermore, it is referenced in the Christian New Testament. Is it possible that the builders of the Serpent Mound knew about the prophecy stated in Genesis 3, and this was their answer to it? A blatant, defiant statement that the serpent would swallow the egg or the seed of the woman and thus prevent the one who would crush his head from being born. Once we plug this idea that the site was built by the Nephilim into the mystery of the Serpent Mound, it provides an answer to the riddle and enigma that has shrouded it for centuries since its discovery. The serpent motif is found all over the world. It is in fact a global phenomenon. Think of Chichen Itza, a site on the Yucatan Peninsula, which has a great pyramid which depicts a serpent undulating and slithering its way down the sides of the pyramid on the equinoxes. Over 50,000 people were ritualistically sacrificed at this site. Why the serpent? Why not something else like a furry rabbit? Why is it that we see the serpent everywhere? Someone in the New Age will tell us that the serpent denotes wisdom. I would ask, where is this wisdom found? And who is the source behind it? The serpent is exactly who we think it is. It is none other than the fallen cherub, Satan, and he can give someone who follows him wisdom. But it comes with a price, and that is a person's soul. The serpent is seen in Peru with the elaborate tapestries found in Paracas, where we found the elongated skulls. The serpent appears in Bolivia at Tiwanaku. It is found in Greek mythos and the goddesses that were worshipped in antiquity. Archaeologists will insist that this effigy was built by Native American peoples called the Adena, or if a latter date is put forth, they will say the Hopewell built the sites. The problem is this: whoever built these effigies did not tell us who they were. We do know, however, that numerous large skeletons were found in the mounds in Ohio and elsewhere, which would support the idea of Nephilim tribes being responsible for the construction. In summation, I would put forth that the Serpent Mound is what I have coined fallen angel technology, or Nephilim architecture. The serpent is trying to swallow the seed of the woman and thus prevent Messiah from manifesting, which ultimately spells the serpent's doom. Folks, if you're at all interested in what we just discussed here on PPS Report, please go to lamarzulli.net, lamarzulli.net, and check out Watchers 10 DNA and my new book, Nephilim Hybrids. That's where the information is in the new book, Nephilim Hybrids, and of course, on the Trail DNA. As a special bonus feature to this episode of Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural Report, I just want to give you a little taste of the Nephilim Mounds Conference and what I presented there. I think you'll find this interesting.
Sometimes I shake my head saying, wow, God is bringing out every aspect to bring exposure to the other side, to bring truth, to bring insight. And so to someone that I know in his integrity, in his walk with God, in his research, in his consuming passion to get to the truth and to bring out more of this information, truly by the hand of God. So let's welcome today on stage L.A. Marzulli.
Amen. Okay. How y'all doing? Here we are, Nephilim Mound 3. It's here. This is the skull, which we call the Oregon skull. It's in a private collection. I'll talk more about that. We've been able to handle it, look at it, and actually take samples, but I'm getting ahead of myself, so what else is new? The title of this one is called An Academic Conspiracy. But let's go on. Gary talked about Genesis 3, and it's so important that we understand the seed war. I don't have to belabor that. That's why I have a springboard here. I will just add one thing to it. If we don't, collectively, as Christians, understand Genesis 3, understand the seed war and its implications, when we get to Genesis 6, when we get to the Tower of Babel, when we come to passages which are very troubling, of course, like Sodom and Gomorrah, when we get to the most troubling passage, and one of the most troubling passages in all of Scripture, which is the conquest of Canaan, where the Most High God, loving God, says, wipe them all out, men, women, and children. If we don't understand that there is a seed war, and this seed war has been going on literally for millennia, we're clueless. And unfortunately, folks, most of the churches never teach it. And so you get a lot of Christians who, I've been a Christian for 40 years, I've gone to church every Sunday, I know my Bible inside out. Do you really? Well, what of a Nephilim? What do you think about the seed war? And they look at you like, well, I don't know anything about that. So Genesis 3 is important for us. If we don't get it, really, in my opinion, we have no clue as to what's going on. There's a breeding program. And guess what? The Antichrist doesn't go to Antichrist school to become the Antichrist. But Jimmy, you're not doing so good. You're not going to make it. Doesn't work that way. He is, in my opinion, the literal seed of the serpent. It's instead of Christ. It's instead of the Messiah, a false Messiah. And that's exactly what we see. And I believe he might be walking on the planet. Who knows? Other people believe that too. Let's move on. So, we know that the promise of Messiah comes. Look at that. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. From now on, you and the woman will be enemies, and your offspring and her offspring will be enemies. Just another translation of it. He will crush your head, you will strike his heel. This happened at Calvary. We all know what happens 2,000 years ago. I don't have to get into that. But the reason for it, it's a cosmic chess match. And we don't understand, as Gary Stearman would say, all the protocols of the heavenly realm. We don't get it. We don't understand everything. For instance, why does it take the angel 21 days to get to Daniel? I don't want to hear that. That's just dreadful. What do you mean it takes 21 days? Well, I was restrained by the Prince of Persia. Well, who cares about the Prince of Persia? Do an end run. No, I can't do that. I had to get Mike and the boys, and we came and we fought. How did they fight? Flaming swords? We don't know. Where are we? Think about it, folks. Where are we? I don't know where we are. It's weird. The Bible is the strangest book I've ever read. It's beyond anything I've ever read in sci-fi. Guys walking on water, 2 gold, you've heard me yak on this, 2 gold coins coming out of the fish's mouth, Red Sea, parting in the middle. Okay, let's keep going. I mean, it's unbelievable where we are. And then Jesus comes in and it's like, ooh, boy. Then it's completely off the charts. Water to wine. Oh, all you lepers out there, you're all healed. Don't worry about it. Cellular, molecular level, boom, they're all healed. How's that happen? I mean, it's unbelievable. It's the supernatural. And we're warned that the supernatural will manifest in the end times. Caveat. Lots going on in September. A lot of fear going on. People's cages are getting rattled. Here's what you got to remember. No one knows what's going to happen. I had a piece of intel that came across my desk. I checked it out as best as I can. I went on Hagman and Hagman show. By the way, they are here. They got a table set up. Thank you, Doug and Joe. Amazing men, godly men. And I went on the Hagman show, and I also did it on my show, and just said, look, this guy is in special ops, and he called my friend, and he said, something's coming down on the 23rd. We don't know what, but it seems like something is coming down on the 23rd, stockpile food and water. I take that as, well, I already got food and water stockpiled, probably 4 to 6 months, but maybe I'll go out and get a little bit more. You should do the same thing. Are we to live in fear? Absolutely not. Should we be walking around going, oh my God, the comet's going to come to Puerto Rico? No, we can't walk that way. We can't. We've got to be bold, adventurous, and daring. We can't have a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind, and that's how we're to walk. So yeah, I get it. The Pope's coming. We got the four blood moon thing. We got the Shemitah thing. I mean, it's like, are you kidding me? All this stuff is happening at the same time. CERN's going to open. Maybe nothing happens. I don't know. But I do know this. We are living in tenuous, tumultuous, unprecedented times. 1 million Islamists have just invaded Europe. Europe will fall without a shot. And that's what's going on. I digress. So, refresher. Last year we talked about, this is all on the Trail of the Nephilim 2, which is available at the back table for the lowly discounted price of, this is Ralph Glidden. The backstory on this real quick, because I got to check my time here. It's already going. No more rabbit trails, Marzulli. Yeah, 10 minutes. There was a cache of records that was found in the Catalina Museum up in the attic, all right, by the former curator, John Borgina. He goes up there and he's rummaging around in the attic, got nothing else to do one night. Poof! He finds this chest, and in that are letters and pictures and all sorts of charts and correspondence from Ralph Glidden. Ralph Glidden was employed by the High Museum 1919 to 1921. High Museum was later gobbled up by the Smithsonian Institute. And he was hired to go out and do primitive archaeological digs all throughout the Catalina Islands. The Catalina Islands, the west coast of the United States, from Santa Barbara down to San Diego. I waved to one from my upper deck. Okay, they're right there, right next to the shore. So I'm there, and it cost me $1,000 to go to the museum. I'm looking at the photographs, and I find pay dirt. This is pay dirt for me. This is the real deal. It's not the nonsense you see on the internet, 20-foot giant, and it's some guy with a skull and a wheelbarrow. It's not what we're looking at. This is the real deal. I've had this photograph analyzed by 3 separate analysts, all who pointed out that this photograph is authentic, number one, and that the skeleton in front of Mr. Glidden is about 9 feet. So we have a 9-footer, okay? This went viral when I published this. This went viral. It got a lot of legs, and the History Channel, which you'll see in a few minutes, actually contacted me because they had nothing for the Arab Brothers show. In Search of a Lost Giants, well, they had nothing in the whole show. So they used me for the finale. The contract was negotiated 3 times before I would come on, and they treated me somewhat fairly. But you'll see the clip for yourself and watch the way they spin it. So here's Ralph Glidden with the picture. In front of him is a 9-footer. I vetted that. This picture, when I got there, was not displayed to the public. No one saw this picture. It was sitting in a plastic envelope, clear plastic envelope in a manila folder, tucked in a museum box in a vault. How's that for research? In other words, all the anthropologists and archaeologists who cataloged this stuff looked at the picture, they didn't see anything weird. The first thing I go is, oh my gosh, because I'm looking for 6 fingers, I'm looking for elongated skulls, and I'm looking for giants. So we have a 9-footer. And this is how it went. We take Ralph Glidden out, we stand him up, we know he's 5'8". We take the skeleton out, we do the same thing with him, we stand him up. Bada bing, we've got 8'6". Actually, it's 8'9", and we rounded it down to 8'6". I could have rounded it up to 9 feet, right? But I didn't. We were not being sensationalistic. We rounded it down to 8.5 feet. That's a big guy. I'm 6 foot, just slightly under 6 foot tall. So add 3 feet to me and then go this way. Are you kidding me? Thanks for watching PPS Report. Remember, folks, I'll see you on the air or in the air.